Welcome to tonight's video. We're going to talk tonight about a different way to read memoir. We spent the first part of the quarter reading memoir to decide what does memoir look like? What does it read like? What kinds of subjects does it use? How much information does it include? How is it structured? So we read memoir to be able to answer the question, what does memoir say and mean? What kinds of messages does the author include in memoir? Whether you have finished your share of it or not, I am moving on. So now our purpose changes from what goes into memoir into how am I going to write good memoir? How can the writers of the memoir I like teach me how to write good memoir? And that's what we're going to look at today, is reading for author's craft. The objectives on the video tonight: when you're finished, you should be able to compare and contrast that close second reading, what does it say, with reading for author's craft, how is it made? You will be given a compare and contrast chart, and you will be expected to fill in at least 2 likenesses and 2 differences when you have finished the video, and I'm going to count it as a test grade. I also expect you to be able to define and clarify elements of author's craft. The guiding questions to help you with your note-taking tonight is: how is reading for author's craft different from that second close reading? And what are some elements of author's craft? What am I reading for? Your understanding will be assessed or measured by how well you've done on your WSQ and your summary, the compare and contrast that I just talked about, and your identification of at least 3 different elements of author's craft in a text. As a review, that close second reading was a reading to answer the question, what? What was the author's message? What did the text say? What did the text mean? What was the author's message to us as readers? What did they want to tell us about the world? What did they want to share about the things that happened to them and what they learned about it? So we close read in order to understand the what. Who's in the story? Setting, characters, plot, conflict, that very first basic level, and then more deeply, that second reading, what does this story mean? What are the author's themes? What symbolism is in this memoir? What is the author saying to us about the world in general? What is the author's message about these memories and how they impacted him or her? The purpose for this second close reading, the purpose behind this what reading, is to gain new perspectives, to gain new ways of looking at our own problems, looking at our own lives in a different set of perspectives or frames, finding new ways to understand the world and our place in it, those reasons that real readers read in the world outside of school. Those purposes should have been met, and so we're moving on. Close reading, that second close reading, is how the author teaches us about life. But reading for author's craft is how the author teaches us about good writing. So the questions are going to change with our purpose. They're changing from what does memoir say to how do I write good memoir, and why did the author make the choices he or she made? This is an important distinction. So the list of things we're going to look for changes because our purpose changes and our question changes. So when we read that second close reading for what the author said, we looked for notice and note. We looked for aha moments. We looked for tough questions. We looked for contrasts and contradictions. They were meant to answer the question, what? But now, because our purpose is to answer the question, how, we're going to look for different things. We're going to look for those elements that make up the author's craft, or how well the author writes something. So now, instead of the notice and note, we're going to begin looking at Word choice, the verbs, the nouns, the adjectives that the author chooses to use. How does the author choose to open the memoir? How does the author choose to conclude the memoir? Where does the author use description? How does the author use description? How does the author use figurative language? What's the impact of that figurative language? How does the author structure his or her sentences and their paragraphs? All of these things have to do with author's craft. Here's a more specific list. Remember that when we look at author's craft, we are looking at the choices the author makes as a writer about how they're going to tell the story. So we're going to consider figurative language. We're going to consider sensory detail. We're going to consider word choice. We're going to consider lead and conclusion. We're going to consider transitions and sentence structure. We're going to consider how we get forward in time, where we move forward and how we go back. These are even more aspects or things you're going to look for, a few more lenses or ways of looking at the writing. Does the author use repetition? How? How does the author structure sentences? How does the author use dialogue? How does the author use punctuation? How does the author use point of view? How does the author create emphasis or suspense? How does the author establish tone and express their thoughts and feelings? These are only questions you can ask when you've answered the what. And we're moving to the how so that you can begin to write effective memoir of your own. This is critical. Make sure that the differences are clear. What are we going to begin looking for when we go back and reread our mentor texts? What do we need to look at to answer the question, how? This was a pretty dense video. Make sure that you've listened as well as watched. Pause, rewind, review if you need to. I know that some of you are simply copying the information on the slide and moving on. That is not going to give you an accurate set of notes for this video, and you will not have the information you need, just like in class. So what you do when you take good notes is that you listen, you make connections, you decide what you understand and what you don't understand. You make notes to clarify things to yourself. Your notes should add to the basic outline I have given you on the slides. Use the essential questions for your left-hand column. Make sure you write an effective summary. You should be able to tell me what the one main idea was in this video in 50 words or less and support it with important evidence from the text. This goes back to that thesis statement idea. What's the one most important thing I had to say to you, and what are the most important points of evidence you need to support that? There's a huge difference between important and interesting. And finally, I expect one good question. And this is not an obvious question. Neither your peers nor I are dumb. And obvious questions serve no purpose at all. Your questions should be thoughtful. The purpose is for you to monitor your comprehension. What do you understand? What do you need to get clarified in class the next day? Remember, your WSQ is not complete unless all three of these pieces are there thoughtfully. And I will be checking. And now we dance. ZZ Top.
Crazy about a shot that's me. about a shark that